Okay, this week we are doing lessons 9 and 10 in the SOLIDWORKS Essentials book. I'm going to make two separate videos. This one will be for lesson 9, which is editing for design changes, and then we'll make a separate video for lesson 10 on configurations. So this model I have up on the screen you should recognize from the previous lesson. It was exercise 38, and this is how your final result should look like after removing all of the errors in the feature manager tree. However, just because there's no more errors in this model doesn't mean there aren't any problems. So some changes we want to make is, for instance, only shelling the base plate feature. So we don't want this whole part to be hollowed out. We only want the bottom base plate to be. And I actually have the final model up here that I can show you. So we can bring both these windows on the screen at the same time. So we're going to start with the model on the left and make it look like the model on the right. And then actually at the end of the lesson, I'm going to come back to this model and we're going to add a cutout on the base plate, and then sort of that'll make like a recessed notched area. And then we can add um, smaller holes on that face. But before we get there, we're going to modify this, change how the shell affects the model. I'm going to remove these holes. We're going to make the boss and this right side face tangent. So you can see that over there. And also the back face is flush with the circular boss, where right now it's protruding out some distance. And we're going to add, fillet on the back. The rib feature right here, we're going to give that a rounded face on the tip. And we also want to make sure it stays centered under the circular boss. So you'll see it's going to get moved inward when this is made tangent. So make sure they always line up centered. Let's see where to go. Okay, that covers all the changes. So I'm going to close that model, maximize this one, and I'll just go to a isometric view. So the first thing we're going to do is just figure out how this thing was built so that we know how we can change it. Because you might not be the one that modeled it, which we aren't in this case. So we have a tool in SOLIDWORKS called the Part Reviewer. It's on the Evaluate tab of the Command Manager. And if you go all the way to the right, there's some arrows where you can expand it and get access to additional buttons. So we're going to click on Part Reviewer. It opens up in the task pane, and we get this new tab down the bottom, Part Reviewer. My task pane wasn't pinned open, so I'm just going to push that push pin in so it stays there. And then we got some buttons here, Jump to Beginning, Step Back, Step Forward, Jump to End, Show Sketch Details, Show Only Features with Comments. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click Jump to Beginning. And this shows me that the first feature that was created is the base plate. And I'm going to enable this option to show sketch details. And what that does is when I step forward, it's going to open up this sketch for that first feature. And notice that we're actually in the sketch. It's open, we can edit. And you always know you're editing a sketch if you see these two buttons up here in the confirmation corner. So we could go ahead and make changes if we wanted to, but we're going to leave it alone. We're just kind of seeing how it's built at the moment. If I click step forward, it's automatically going to exit that sketch and go to the next feature. If I rotate here, we can see it's these two fillets. So we have one fillet feature, which means these are equal radii fillets. I'm going to go ahead and step forward. The next feature we have is the vertical plate. So we can see that's flush with the back of the base plate. And if I click step forward, it'll open up the sketch. So we're looking at the back of the part right now, normal to. If I wanted to flip it around, one thing you could do is Control 8 on the keyboard, which is the normal to command. But if you notice up here on the heads up view toolbar, I actually added a button. So if I wanted to flip this around, I could get it close to how I want it and then click a face. And then I can click normal to, so it goes normal to that face. The way I added that button is just to right click on an empty space of the command manager and select customize. And then go to the commands tab and just search for normal to. So here's our button, and you can just drag and drop this anywhere. You can put it up here on the command manager. I just put it, somewhere on the heads up view toolbar. So now I have two of them, but you can simply just drag them on or off. So you can do that for any command. This is also where you can find keyboard shortcuts that you can customize and other shortcuts and toolbars. So I'm going to get out of there. So that's a really easy way to use that normal to. You'll see this command in right click menus, how or left click or right click, but when you're in a sketch, it's not easy, or you actually don't have the option to go normal to unless you do Control 8. So that button is helpful when you're actually in the sketch. So a little tip there. Um, so we can see, how this sketch is constrained and dimensioned. Before we get out of this sketch, we're going to take a look at some of those relations. So I can always just click on a line, for instance, and we'll see the relations pop up. So I hover, it's tangent to the arc on that side, tangent to the arc on the other side. You can click through different entities and it'll show the relations on that entity. You can also go up to the view menu and then click this button and it'll just show all the relations at once. And you can hover over those relations, it'll highlight the entities. So for instance, this is an on edge relation, meaning this line is, I don't want to use the word collinear, but it follows this edge. It is collinear, but there's also a relation called collinear. So I typically turn off the view sketch relations because they're easy to get to. But if you just want to pull them up, it's very helpful. We can also use this command up here called display delete relations. So if I click that, this is on the sketch tab. Then in the property manager, I can see all the relations in this sketch. We can filter this for different types of relations. Dangling are things that have problems. There's no actual problems here. And these other ones we can talk about in more advanced lessons. But for now, we're just looking at all the relations. And you can just simply click on them and they'll highlight in the graphics area. So we can see those. You can delete them from here. You can also see which one. This is a distance. Let me do the tangent. So this tangent, for instance, if we go down to entities, it shows me that it's arc1, which is highlighted there when I click on it, and line 7. So if I wanted to make arc1 tangent to something different, you could actually click one of these entities and use this replace option, where it would click a different entity and apply the tangency. Okay, so I'm going to step forward rather. And next we have the circular plane feature. So this is a reference plane. You can see it's offset from the back face. But what is it? How was it created? We don't. It's not super clear to me right now. I don't know for sure. And by the way, we can always stretch these out if we want to. But we can investigate this. So we have this reference plane. We don't really know exactly what it's used for yet. So if I right click on the part name in the feature manager, I've got these two buttons here called dynamic reference visualization. So we have the parent and the child. I'm going to enable that for the parent. I'm going to right click again. You can see how it's toggled in. And I'm going to toggle it in for the child. So now if I hover over the circular plane, I get these two arrows. Um, and there could be more arrows depending on the feature. But what this is telling me is the circular plane has the base plate as its parent and the sketch 3 of the circular boss as its child. So the downward purple arrows are the pointing to the children, and the upward blue arrows are telling you the parents. So the circular plane is offset from the face of the base plate. So the vertical plate and the base plate all became one face. So we're considering it the base plate. We see I hover, it says it's a base plate, no matter where I hover. So without this face, the circular plane can't exist. So that's why the base plate is apparent. And then the circular boss, it turns out, is sketched on that plane. The sketch for that circular boss is sketched on that plane, and that's why it is a child. We delete the plane, that circular boss is going to get deleted because you can't have the child without the parent. If there's no plane to sketch on, the sketch is going to get deleted as well. So the sketch for the circular boss is just a circle. So very simple. I'm going to turn off the show sketch details at this point so that when I click jump forward, as I'll do now, it's going to go right to the circular boss and not show the sketch. But we can, I will tell you that the sketch is on that circular plane. And you can see if I hover over the plane that it's in line with that. All right, I'm going to continue to go forward. And next we have the rib under feature. And by the way, this rib is sketched on this face right here, and then it's extruded up to the circular boss. See if I missed anything so far. I did miss one thing. I'm sorry. Let's step back. So it's no problem just to step back. Now go back to the vertical plate. That's the fillet. One forward. Oh, I was confused because that's expanded there. Okay, so this is the vertical plate as you can see in the part reviewer. And there's a comment on this feature. It says, remember to double check the thickness of this feature. So comments are things you can add on the features. It's just a note. They show up in this comments folder. And if you hover there, it says, remember to double check the thickness of this feature. The way to add a comment, for example, if I wanted to add one to the base plate, you just right click and then select comment, and then the flyout menu, add comment, and then it would also show up in this comments folder. So since we're in the part reviewer over here in the task pane, we can click this pencil icon, which lets you edit the feature in the comment. I could change the name, I could change the comment, or what I'm actually going to do in this case is just delete it. So I just click the delete button. Now it says no comments available for this feature. Okay, so we will step forward now to the wall thickness. So I'm just going to go forward. So the wall thickness feature is our shell command. And why is it editing it? Okay, so we're at the wall thickness. So now you can see it is shelled out. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with so it doesn't shell the entire model. I'm going to step forward again. Now we got the counter bore hole. But if you look, it doesn't look like a counter bore. So if we look at the feature, it's a hole wizard feature. So there's two sketches. One is just a point for the location, and then the other is a profile. This sketch here is just automatically created from the hole wizard. But you can see there would be this larger diameter, and then there'd be another hole on top of that hole with a smaller diameter. And this is a revolved cut. So because this thing is shelled, that counterbore isn't really a counterbore. So we're going to end up deleting those. And then if I step forward, we see the second hole, which is just a linear pattern. And then we have a couple fillets. I'm just going to jump to the end. So there's our fillets. And now we'll just close the part reviewer with the X here. And let's actually start making the changes. So first thing I'm going to do is to delete the counterbore holes. And we're going to think about what might happen. So if I look at the parent-child relationships, if I delete that one counterbore hole, the linear pattern 1 is a child, as I can see with that purple arrow. So I'm expecting the pattern to be deleted as well, because the pattern can't exist if the seed feature doesn't exist. So to delete a feature, we can just click on it and hit the delete button on the keyboard. You can also right click and choose delete. And as expected, it's saying, do we want to delete the dependent items? So dependent items is another name for child features. By default, it's selected to delete the child features, and this is just listing them out. So sketch 5 and sketch 6, they're the sketches of the counterbore, the location, and the profile. So of course they will be deleted as well. So I'm just going to say yes to confirm the deletion, and both holes go away as expected. And then now what we're going to do is try to move the shell feature. So the idea here is if we do the shell on the bottom base plate before these other features exist, then they won't get shelled. So I'm going to try to move the wall thickness feature up to just under the base fillet. But if you notice, once I go past the circular plane, it says it cannot reorder. Change would put child feature above its parent. Okay, so let's hover over that and see, confirm the circular boss is the parent. So why is that? We can find out if we edit the feature. You'll notice that there's 3 faces selected, and 2 of those faces are the front and back of the circular boss. So if I want to make it so that the shell is not a child of the circular boss, I just have to click on these faces. So you can click, each time you click it's either on or off, like a toggle. You can also right click in here and delete things. So now we're just removing the bottom face. So only the base plate is apparent now. And I click OK. So now if I hover on that, you'll see that only the base plate is the parent. So now we should be able to move this all the way up. I'm going to do it I'm going to go move below base fillet because I want these fillets to be there before the shell happens. So we have a nice shell there. And you can see it only shelled the bottom now. That's because if we were to, if we did that from the beginning, this is what it would look like. And then you'd be adding those other features on top of this. So that's why they don't get shelled. I'm going to go back to the end. And what's next? All right, next thing we're going to do is edit the sketch for the vertical plate. So I'm going to go find that sketch. Click Edit Sketch. So here's where I can utilize that normal to. So if you click normal to, it'll just flip it 180 degrees. But as I said before, you can just rotate the model close to how you want it. click on any face or plane that you want to be normal to, and then click that normal to button. And I'll remind you, we got that from the customize menu. So I added that button just to make things a little easier. So we're editing the sketch, and I'm just going to click this point right here. And then I got the option to make tangent. And little tip here, remember these context menus, if I move the mouse to the left, that menu disappears. So if you're having trouble with it, always move towards the menu. But if you're not going to use this menu, move to the left, it'll disappear. So I'll click that and then do make tangent. All right, so we have a problem. Because our sketch was already fully defined and we added another relation, now it's over-defined, as you can see down here, which means we have to remove some other dimension or relation so that this thing can be solvable. We could do that manually, but we also have a tool called the Sketch Expert. And an easy way to get there is just to right-click in the white space and then choose Sketch Expert. And then click Diagnose in the Property Manager. So it actually gives us 4 solutions that'll make this sketch solvable. First solution is to remove the tangent constraint. But that's the one I just added, right? So it's kind of funny. But SOLIDWORKS doesn't know. It's just trying to make this sketch be satisfied. So I'm going to click this arrow here to show a different solution. And you'll notice the sketch actually updates. So it's a preview of how it's going to look if I accept that solution. You can see in the background like a grayed out copy of the original sketch. So here we have our tangent just like the way we want it. And it's saying it can do that if it deletes, you see the little red slash there, if it deletes this dimension. So the dimension is labeled distance 7 in this case. All right, so let's just take a look at the other solutions before we decide. So another solution is to remove the diameter dimension. Another solution is to remove the on-edge relation, so it's no longer in line with that edge, but it's still tangent. So I'm going to go and select solution 2, which is to get rid of this distance of 151.45. And you just click accept, and it'll actually do that for you. Now it says the sketch can now find a valid solution. Green is good, red is bad, and we'll just click OK. And now my sketch is good. We can see it's still fully defined. So we can go ahead and exit the sketch. I just want to mention that we could, not use the Sketch Expert, and you could just manually delete that dimension. Same result. So I'll exit sketch. Feature gets rebuilt, and now we can focus on this rib feature. So remember, we want to, since the circular boss now moved over because of that edit we made to the sketch, the rib needs to get moved to center it. And then remember, we want to put a rounded tip on the rib. So let's edit the sketch for the rib. And what I'm going to do is orient this. So I'm looking normal to, but I want to orient it the other way. So I'm just going to get it close to the way I want it. And then click a face that I want to be normal to, click my new normal to button. So that's the orientation the book has it in. And then we'll just edit this sketch. So I'm just going to delete this dimension. Just highlight it, click the delete key. And that allows me to move. Well, let's do another thing. If I click on this, well, I'll show you. Let's do the way the book does it. So if I go to my view menu, go to sketch relations, I can see, for instance, that there is a collinear relation to the edge. So I'm just going to click on that relation and delete it. So sometimes it's helpful just to see all the relations if you're not sure. Like I could take a guess that it was collinear. but whatever works best for you. So now I can move this over. But we're also seeing now we lost, it's not vertical anymore. Another thing I do, I can highlight all of this if I want to kind of move it together. Oh, I thought I could. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click this line, and then it gives me a couple options. I'll just say make vertical. Notice that the vertical option is kind of halfway pushed in. So it's closer to vertical than horizontal. So SOLIDWORKS kind of makes an assumption for you. So I'll just click make vertical. All right, so now I can just drag this thing over to an approximate position. We want to make this a rounded tip, so I'm going to delete. And we'll come back to this in the next example. I'm just going to click yes for now. And we'll make this rounded tip. So I'm going to use actually for this, we're going to use a tangent arc. So a tangent arc is just 2 points, and then it makes it tangent to those entities. So real easy. If I click on it, you'll see it's got the tangent on both sides. But I'm going to move this, just drag it back a little bit, because eventually I want to add a dimension between the tangent part of the arc and this circular edge. But let's constrain this more first. So we're going to do a smart dimension, put a radius of 8 on that arc I just created. We're going to, okay, and then we want to make it 2 millimeters from the end of the circular boss. But if you notice, like I can hover and I click the arc, but I'm having trouble clicking the edges. I can click these edges, but I'm not getting this edge here. So what you want to do in that case is just temporarily move into a 3D view. So now you can see I can hover and I can select that circular edge. So I click that edge, and then I don't want to get the center point of this arc, because if I just click the arc, it's going to go to the center. So what I need to do is hold the shift key and then click the arc. And when you do that, you get the tangency of the arc. It's going to make that 2. And then I'm going to escape, click that face, and go back normal to. So now you can see I have that 2 millimeter distance. So we're just adding a gap there of 2 millimeters. Now the other thing I want to do is center this. So now, as I drag this, it's not constrained. So I'm going to center it on the circular boss. And you can kind of see these axes showing up. But to make sure I do this correctly, I'm going to turn on in the view menu, where am I? The eyeball. Now we have axes, which are like reference geometry, like reference planes that we've seen. We could also create a axis, but we don't have to create an axis because anything that is circular already has an axis built in. It's just hidden. So these are called temporary axes, and we can utilize those to constrain our sketches. So I'm going to toggle that on and show you how it works. I'll just go into a 3D view. So you can see the fillets have axes, and the cylindrical boss has an axis. Go back to normal. And let's just get this approximate in position. And then I'm just going to take the center point of this arc and just drag it onto that temporary axis. And you'll see how the coincident relation is showing in yellow. That means it's gonna apply a coincident relation. And now you see it turn black, and we are fully defined. So we can just exit the sketch. And notice our rib is updated. Our next thing we want to do is let's turn off these axes since we don't need them. So it'll stay constrained even if you hide these axes, that's no problem. We want to make the end of the circular boss flush with this face. So I could think of a couple ways to do that. We could move the plane. I like to make this bigger. We could move this plane so it is flush on this face, but we could also just use this face and not even need the plane. So a cool thing you can do, if we go to the circular boss and find the sketch and right click on it, or left click or right click in the upper menu, we have edit sketch, which you've seen many times, but the button next to that is edit sketch plane. When I click that, it kind of brings up the circular plane because that's the current plane where the sketch exists. But I could just click on this face and it's going to move my sketch to that face. Click OK, and you can see it there. There's the circle for the sketch, and now it is flush. So next thing we can take a look at is the circular plane. It still exists in our feature manager, but it's actually not being used for anything. So you see it has no children. There's no purple arrows going downward. So if I delete it, nothing's going to happen. There's no children that are going to be affected. So the parent, everything has a parent because the plane, is offset from this face a certain distance. So the plane is, this is the reference, the reference for the reference plane. So when you create the plane, that face was chosen. That's why it becomes a parent. But there's no children, as you can see. You can also right-click on features and do parent-child. That's another way to view it. So we got the parent as the base plate because it uses the face of that. And there's no children. So we can just right-click and delete that feature just to clean it up. Okay, last thing we're going to do is with fillets. So if you take a look at this, we've got some fillets on here already. This side of the circular boss has a fillet, fillets around the rib, but if you look at this side, this edge doesn't have a fillet. And then the other thing we want to do, let me just check here. Yeah, for this model, we're going to see, we're going to continue with this in a moment. But for right now, we just want to add fillets on those edges I mentioned. So we're going to edit the circ fillet, edit feature, and we're just going to add this edge. Should I get the edge? And then we got tangent propagation checked, so it's going to add all the tangencies until it hits something that's not tangent. That's why that edge doesn't get filleted. I'm just going to click OK. All right. Okay, so I think we got everything there. Okay, so I'm gonna show you another model very quickly, and then we're gonna come back to this model, another version of it, and add a couple other features to show another concept. So I'm just gonna close this one. Yeah, we're gonna add some holes like this, but before we do that, I have one part to show, and you've seen this before as well. What we're going to do in this case, I'm just going to take a look at the front view, and you'll notice that the top is flat, and we just want to modify, make a design change so that it's an arc shape on the top. So what I'm going to do is just edit the sketch that contains, this line, for instance, in this sketch is what defines the flat top of that. So that's what I need to edit. So I'm going to go edit sketch. And then we're just going to do a 3-point arc because this arc's not actually going to be tangent to anything, just a 3-point arc. And you'll see here it tells you what points to click in what order. So first point, second point, and then middle point. And then I'll just hit escape. And then we'll add a radius dimension to that. It's going to be 77. That was pretty close. All right. So this is going to become the new top face of the part. All right, but we want to delete this edge. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight that and hit the delete key. And here's that prompt that we saw earlier that I just clicked yes to and said we'll come back to it. So there are some important things to consider here. So let's actually take a moment to read it. It says this item has associated dimensions or has been referenced outside of the sketch or is a seed of a sketch pattern. Do you want to delete it anyway? Basically, it's saying there could be some downstream consequences of this if I just simply say yes and delete it. But we know that we want to delete it. We're basically replacing it with this arc entity. So we just say replace entity, and I'll just click on the arc. Now you can see in the property manager, it's going to replace the line with the arc. Now there's two options here. We can simply delete it or make construction. And then I'll explain more about what the replace is actually doing. But if I just delete it, there's a couple things to consider. If I just delete it, then anything this line is attached to loses its relationship or dimension. So if I were to just click delete, this 21 millimeter dimension is going to get deleted. And then this center line will still be there, but it's not going to be attached to anything. So right now it's constrained on the midpoint. If I delete that line, it's not constrained to the midpoint of the arc. So, it might not be, this part might not be symmetric anymore. So the easy way to deal with that so that nothing changes in this sketch is just to click make construction. So I'll click OK. So what that does, it just turns in a construction line. All the relationships are still intact, and we're still fully defined. That's the other thing. If we just delete it, we'll lose some relationships and dimensions, and it'll be underdefined. And the nice thing about having a construction line is that it's still just one closed contour. Right? These construction lines are ignored, so we don't have two different regions that might affect the extrusion. So now I'm just going to click Exit Sketch. Now it updates, or rebuilds rather, and we have a nice rounded top. Okay, so one other thing really quick that I want to mention about replacing an entity you delete is not just about losing some dimensions, it can also affect the 3D geometry. So if I roll this back just after the two chamfers, and let's edit the first chamfer, you'll notice that the chamfer is done on all of these blue edges. Now, if I were to, let's just close and reopen this part. No, this is fine. If I were to edit that sketch again, and I will, let's delete this edge. We'll just do the reverse. So I'm going to delete with replace, or I'm sorry, I'm not going to replace it this time. We're going to turn this one back into we're going to uncheck for construction. So it's back the way it was. And then this one I'm going to delete. And I'm just going to say yes this time. So now it's basically back to the way it was. And we're going to exit sketch. But it gives me an error. So I'm just going to say continue and ignore the error. And we'll just close this. So see what happens. The chamfer is not getting applied to that edge anymore. And if I edit the chamfer now, look at the blue edges and look at what's kind of showing in red there, the one I deleted. So in the property manager it says missing edge. So if you delete it without replacing, it's trying to do the chamfer on the edge that doesn't exist. So the replace avoids these errors. I could still fix it manually though. So I would just come in here, highlight the missing edge, and then select the actual edge that does exist and hit OK. And now it updates the chamfer. So it can have effects in the sketch itself, with dimensions that might get deleted, or features that reference that edge that was created from that geometry can go missing. Okay, so that's it for that model. So that's the concept of replace entity. Last thing for this lesson is contour selection. So I have a sketch here called contour selection. Um, so you'll see in the sketch, we have a rectangular contour and then these circular contours. So contours are when you have multiple regions in a sketch. All right, so I'm going to roll back to, I'm sorry. First, we're going to reorder. So I'm going to move just by dragging and dropping the contour selection to below the base fillet. All right, so we put our sketch right before the shell. And then we're going to roll back to that. So if I just grab my rollback bar and just bring it right past that sketch. So the reason to move that is we're going to insert our cut feature at this point in the tree. So when I do an extruded cut, which I'm about to do, it's not going to end up at the bottom of the tree. It's going to end up right before this rollback bar. And it's nice to have the sketch right next to the feature. All right, so, well, the reason I had to move the sketch is because if I moved the rollback bar, the sketch would be grayed out, suppressed down here. So we move that to where we want to put the feature. All right, so if I select that sketch, I could take advantage of the shortcut key. I'm just going to press S on the keyboard, and then I'll click the extruded cut button, or command. And by default, it sort of selects the rectangular profile or contour without the circles. So we can adjust that. If we go to the selected contours area here, I'm just going to right click and clear. And then you can see as I hover the mouse, there's a couple different ways to select things when you have multiple contours. So you can just select regions, just click different regions, or you can select an entire contour. So let me try that again. So if I want the whole rectangle, instead of clicking all the different regions, I can just click the rectangle itself. So they're all known as contours, but I kind of think of the actual entities as the contour, and then I just call these shaded areas regions. But if I select that rectangular contour, it gives me the entire region. And that's all I want to do. We're going to go 10 millimeters blind depth, and it's a cut downward, and just click OK. So now we've created a new face where we can start the holes. But the sketch already has the holes. So the idea here is we can reuse that sketch multiple times. So before we go forward, I'm just going to rename this cut extrude 1 to hole dash r underscore mtg. I think it's whole meeting. That's just an arbitrary name. Okay, so even though the sketch is on this face and not this face, as you can see, we can still use these circles to cut holes downward. So what we can do is right click on the sketch. So we're gonna, there's always multiple ways to do things. So we're gonna do something similar to what I showed you. We're just gonna do it in a way where we pre-select the contours before we click the extruded cut command. So if I right click on the sketch and then expand the menu, I've got this option called Contour Select Tool. So you can see my mouse cursor changed an icon to show the Contour Select Tool. And now I can do that same thing I was doing in the blue box earlier when the command was active, but I'm just pre-selecting. So SOLIDWORKS knows I'm looking for a contour, so that's why it's highlighting like so. But because I'm pre-selecting, whenever you're not in an active command and you're pre-selecting, you need to hold the control key if you're going to select more than one thing. So I want both holes, so I'm going to hold control, click the actual circle, and then click the other actual circle. And then we'll click extruded cut on the feature. So because I pre-selected both holes, now they show up in the selected contours. All right, so all we have to do is just do cut through all. So I'm going to change the direction, or change it from blind to through all. And it doesn't matter that it starts up in here in dead space. We're just going to cut in that direction. It'll hit this other face and cut through it. Now when you use that contour selection, the sketch stays visible. But we are done with that sketch, so I can go ahead and hide it. I'll just click on it and then hit the eyeball. So you'll see we have two features here that use the same sketch. So this is a shared sketch. So that's, a modeling technique that you can use if you like to do it that way. And now I'm going to roll to end. So, we can drag and drop this rollback bar to any position we want, or we can just right click roll to end. And then all the other features get rebuilt. And if I take a look at the bottom, it doesn't look the way I want it to. These cylindrical faces, I don't want them to be there. I'll show you why they're there. If I right click on and edit the shell feature, you'll see that these cylindrical faces, once the bottom face is removed, the way the shell command works is it removes the face you select, and all the other remaining faces get a thickness added to them. So this cylindrical face is going to get a thickness, the full depth of it. So the way to fix that is to reorder the shell or the hole command, or the hole feature. So we're going to create the holes after the shell. So right now we have the holes, and let's rename them. So we'll just call these through holes. And I'll show you what happens. We're just going to drag them below the shell command. And that's how I want it to look. So the way this works is if we were going from beginning to end, you do the shell, it looks like that. Right? You don't end up with those cylindrical faces because they're not there yet. You just have a thinner thickness to cut through. then you just do the holes through that thin material there. So I'm going to go back to the end. And last thing we want to do is add some fillets. So I'll show you a technique you can use to copy a fillet. So we have a fillet here called circ fillet, which is around the circular boss. And we're going to make a new fillet with a different radius, but just to show you a cool way to create a fillet, I can either click on the fillet in the feature tree, or I can click on the fillet in the graphics window. And if I hold the control key, I can left click and drag that fillet onto a different edge. So I'm just gonna drop it on this edge, and it copies that fillet to this edge. And then you got the tangent propagation, goes until there's nothing tangent. So it creates a new fillet in the tree, excuse me, that I can edit, and then just change the radius to 3 in this case. Enter. That rebuilds to 3. So we got 3mm fillet there. And then we want to do a 3mm fillet on this side. New fillet feature. Oh, so this is 3mm. We can just edit this existing fillet that we just created from copying, and then add, this other edge, and then the tangent propagation, so that we still have a single fillet feature there for the 3mm. All right, so again, take a fillet, control drag onto an edge, creates a new fillet. And then you can edit it and manage it independently. I'm going to delete that one though. My next thing I want to show you is section views. And this is just a graphics section view just for display purposes. And let me just turn off these reflections. I don't really like the reflections. All right, so a section view, we can do it with one of the 3 default planes or a face of the model. So I'm going to click this face, and pre-select it, and then click section view on the heads up view toolbar. And this gives me some arrows, a handle, that I can just move this anywhere through the model. So section view is when you want to see, something internal in the model. So I'm just going to put about halfway through that hole there. Oh, you know what? I'm on the wrong thing. I want to show you the planar option first. So we'll come back to that zonal option, but this is just your basic section view. So we got a plane that's parallel to that front face, and we're just going to drag it halfway through that hole, about halfway. And then we're going to section this model in a different direction by activating section 2. And then in this case, we're going to use one of the default planes, and it gives you buttons right here to enable that. So I'm going to use the right plane. And then I'm going to drag it about halfway through the cylindrical boss. Then we're going to activate a third section, and this one will be the top plane. And I'm going to come up about halfway through the circular boss as well in that direction. And then that's your result, right? So you can cut this up any way you like. And then the other way to do it is a zonal section. So when you click zonal, you get this intersection zone. If I highlight it, it shows me all these different zones, all these different zones, I guess. of how those three planes, based on that front face, the default right plane, and the default top plane, dragged into a different position, how they cut up the model. So you can just click on different zones here, and these are like what's going to get cut away. So I think it's this back one, this one, and so we got three zones we're going to cut out, and then just hit the green check. And you're going to make a different cutaway views of your model. So is there something obstructing something you want to see? You can do that. And the section view, you see it's toggled on. You can just turn it off, and your model's back to the way it was. It's just for display purposes. All right, that is it for lesson 9.